Daniel stood in the middle of the living room, his voice flat, almost careless, as he spoke the words Grace never thought she would hear. "I'm leaving you, Grace. There's someone else. Her name's Sophia. She's younger, she makes me feel alive again." The air seemed to freeze. Grace blinked, her hands tightening around the edge of the sofa cushion. 18 years of marriage, 18 years of sacrifices, shared struggles, shared dreams, shattered in a few short sentences. Daniel didn't stop there. He looked at her, not with regret, but with something closer to contempt. "You've gotten too old, too boring. Life with you feels dull. Sophia is different. She excites me." Each word struck her like a blade. Grace wanted to ask why, to shout, to cry, but her voice refused to come. She sat in silence, her face pale, her heart pounding. Inside, a storm raged. Outside, she was still as stone. Daniel didn't wait for her to respond. He turned, grabbing the suitcase he had left by the door. His movements were quick, almost impatient, as though he couldn't leave fast enough. Shirts, shoes, ties, all thrown into the bag without care. Grace's eyes followed him. She thought of the mornings they used to share coffee before work, of the long nights when they were too tired to talk but still fell asleep hand in hand. She thought of the vows he once made, promises of forever, now broken like glass underfoot. "You'll be fine," Daniel muttered, zipping the suitcase. "You don't need me. I'll send for the rest of my things later." "Fine." She almost laughed, but no sound left her throat. He was so sure of himself, so sure she would crumble without him. He didn't even notice the flicker in her eyes, the faint glimmer of something stronger than pain. When he finally slammed the door behind him, the silence in the house was deafening. Grace sat alone in the living room, staring at the empty space he left behind. The echo of his cruel words still rang in her ears. Too old, too boring. Her gaze drifted to the family portrait hanging on the wall. Daniel's arm around her, their daughter Emily smiling brightly between them. A perfect picture of a life he had just thrown away like it meant nothing. Grace stood, walked closer, and touched the frame with trembling fingers. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, in a whisper only the walls could hear, her lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. "He has no idea what he just walked away from." Grace had grown up in a small house where nothing ever felt secure. Her father worked long hours, but money always seemed to vanish before the month ended. Sometimes the fridge was nearly empty, and she would pretend she wasn't hungry so her younger brother could have the last piece of bread. She learned early that life was hard when you had no control, and she promised herself she would never live like that again. Books became her escape. She read late into the night under a weak lamp, teaching herself lessons beyond what school offered. She studied harder than anyone else, because she believed education was her way out. When her classmates laughed at her worn-out shoes, she simply tied them tighter and walked on, telling herself that one day she would buy as many pairs as she wanted. After school, she worked odd jobs, cleaning houses, waiting tables, even sewing clothes for neighbors. Every coin she earned, she saved. By the time she finished college, she had learned the habit of discipline. Spend little, save much, and always think ahead. Grace started her first small business in her early 20s. It wasn't glamorous, just a little shop where she sold handmade crafts and clothing. But she poured her heart into it, and slowly, customers returned. Bit by bit, she expanded. One shop turned into two, then into something bigger. Eventually, she built a company that became the backbone of her security. But she never flaunted it. She kept her finances quiet, even with Daniel. To him, she let it seem like they were just getting by. Part of it was protection. Part of it was instinct. She wanted to know that no matter what happened, she and her daughter would be safe. Daniel was different. He had always been charming, the kind of man who could light up a room with his smile. That charm had attracted her when she was younger, when she was still learning to believe in herself. He talked about dreams, about living big, about taking chances. But as the years passed, she realized his chances often meant risks they couldn't afford. In the first years of their marriage, he gambled money on business ideas that failed, bought things they didn't need, and leaned on Grace to fix the gaps. She did quietly. She covered bills, managed debts, and kept their lives steady. Daniel liked being the man who looked in control, so Grace let him believe it. Stability mattered more than pride. Her true motivation was always safety. She never wanted her daughter, Emily, to feel the hunger or fear she once felt as a child. Emily was 17 now, bright, strong-willed, and observant. She loved both her parents, but she wasn't blind. She saw how Daniel dismissed Grace, how he brushed her off during family conversations, how he rolled his eyes when Grace spoke about work. Sometimes Emily would sit with her mother in the kitchen, resting her chin on her hand. "Mom," she'd say softly, "why do you let him talk to you like that?" Grace would only smile, never giving away the deeper truths she carried. And then there was Sophia. Young, bold, and carefree. She dressed in bright colors, laughed too loudly, and carried herself as if the world owed her a good time. To Daniel, she was excitement, a reminder of youth and adventure. To Grace, she was a shadow at the edge of her marriage, the kind of person who wanted the sweetness of life without ever planting seeds for it. Grace's heart ached with betrayal. To give 18 years of her life, only to be replaced by someone who offered nothing but thrill. It was a wound deeper than words could reach. At night, when the house was quiet, she lay awake staring at the ceiling, the humiliation pressing down like a weight. And yet, beneath the pain, there was calm. A strange, steady calm that came from knowing something Daniel did not. She had built her life carefully, brick by brick in silence. She had not begged when he left because she didn't need to. He believed she was weak, but Grace knew the truth. And though her heart was bruised, her resolve was unbroken. Weeks later, the whispers began. Friends of friends, people from church, even neighbors. Everyone seemed to know before Grace did. Daniel and Sophia were out in the city almost every night. Expensive restaurants. Weekend trips. A shiny new car that Sophia proudly drove, though everyone knew Daniel had paid for it. Grace heard it all secondhand. She never asked, but the stories found their way to her ears like cruel messengers. Each time, her chest tightened, but she never let the pain show. She still had Emily to care for, still had a business to run. Crying in the dark hours of the night was one thing. Falling apart in front of her daughter was another. Daniel had officially moved into Sophia's apartment. The same man who once promised Grace that they would build a home together now lived in a small space with someone who barely knew him. Grace pictured their bedroom, his empty side of the bed, his clothes no longer in the closet, and felt a hollow ache, but she pressed forward. Her focus became survival of the spirit. Every morning, she made Emily breakfast before school. Every day, she poured herself into her work, signing contracts, meeting clients, expanding her company quietly while the world assumed she was just managing. She wore her pain like armor, silent but unbreakable. Then one evening, Daniel returned. He knocked once before walking inside as if he still owned the place. A half-empty suitcase trailed behind him. "I just came for the last of my things," he said, his voice casual, almost dismissive. His eyes didn't linger on Grace, only scanned the room as if searching for what he had left behind. Grace stayed seated at the kitchen table, her hands folded neatly, her face calm. "Take what you need," she answered softly. Daniel moved through the house, opening drawers, pulling out clothes, muttering under his breath. The silence between them grew heavy until finally, he stopped in the hallway, turning to look at her. "You know," he said with a smirk, "this place feels emptier than I remembered. Cold. Lifeless. You'll die alone in this big empty house, Grace. You'll fade away here, waiting for someone who'll never come." His words were sharp, meant to cut, meant to leave scars. For a moment, Grace felt her throat tighten, her eyes burning with unshed tears. But then something shifted inside her. She rose slowly from her chair and met his gaze. Her voice was steady, calm, and colder than he had ever heard it. "Daniel," she said, each word measured, "you've made the biggest mistake of your life." He blinked, caught off guard. There was no begging, no pleading, no heartbreak spilling from her lips, only quiet certainty. It unsettled him. The room seemed to still, the weight of her words hanging in the air like a storm about to break. Daniel looked at her, searching for weakness, but found none. Grace's eyes didn't waver. Her silence, her calm, was stronger than any anger she could have shown. And in that moment, the story shifted. This was no longer just about a broken heart. It was about something deeper, something Daniel had yet to understand. Sophia was not the type of woman who settled for less. She wanted designer handbags, sparkling jewelry, luxury trips to the coast, and dinners in the most expensive restaurants. She wanted security too, her own apartment upgraded, a car that turned heads, and money always at her fingertips. Daniel, blinded by his pride, tried to keep up. For a while, he enjoyed the thrill of showing off, swiping his cards as though they were endless. But soon the numbers began to suffocate him. His credit cards were stretched to the limit, and late-night calls from the bank became a constant reminder of his mistakes. Grace, meanwhile, carried herself with quiet strength. She poured her energy into her business, meeting new clients, signing bigger deals, and growing what she had built with steady hands. She didn't chase revenge with anger. She chased her own peace with progress. At home, Emily noticed. One evening, she sat with her mother at the kitchen table, her face full of concern. "Mom," she said softly, "why aren't you fighting him? Why aren't you telling everyone the truth about what he's done? He's humiliating you, and you just stay quiet." Grace placed her hand gently on her daughter's. Her eyes were calm, though deep inside they carried a storm. "Emily," she said, her voice steady, "sometimes the best revenge is patience. Let people reveal who they really are. In time, truth always wins." Emily frowned but nodded slowly, sensing there was something her mother wasn't saying, something hidden beneath her calm. Rumors began to spread in the community. People whispered that Daniel was broke, that the glamorous dinners and luxury cars were nothing but a mask. Friends who once admired his boldness now shook their heads, saying he had lost himself. Sophia, once so full of laughter, turned restless. She mocked Daniel for being unable to provide the lifestyle she wanted. Her sharp words cut into him, and soon the charm that had once drawn her in wasn't enough. "What's the point of you?" she snapped one night. "If you can't even keep me happy?" The more she demanded, the more Daniel sank. He began drinking, slowly at first, then more heavily. Grace heard the stories from Emily's friends. Whispers of Daniel stumbling out of bars late at night, his face worn and tired, his pride shattered. Grace still felt the ache of betrayal. At night, when the house was quiet, she would lie awake and remember their early years. The long walks, the laughter, the way he used to hold her hand as if he'd never let go. The memories stung like open wounds. But each tear she shed hardened into resolve. She no longer cried for what she had lost. She grieved for the illusion she once believed in. And with every sleepless night, she grew stronger, sharper, and more certain of who she was without him. Her silence was not weakness. It was power building in the shadows. Daniel showed up at Grace's house on a rainy evening, his clothes damp, his face pale, his eyes bloodshot. He didn't look like the confident man who once walked out of this door with a suitcase and a smirk. He looked smaller, older, almost broken. Grace opened the door slowly, surprised to see him there. For a moment, neither spoke. The sound of the rain filled the silence between them. "Grace," Daniel said, his voice trembling, "please, let me in." She stepped aside without a word. He walked in, glancing around the house as though it were foreign to him now. His shoulders sagged, his pride stripped away. Sophia had left him. Word spread quickly. She had grown tired of his empty promises, his mounting debts, his inability to keep up with her endless demands. When the money ran out, so did she. Daniel sat on the edge of the sofa, his hands clasped together. He looked up at Grace with pleading eyes. "I made a mistake," he whispered. "I was confused. I thought I wanted something different. But it was nothing, Grace. Sophia was nothing. You're my home. Please, can we try again?" Grace stood across the room, her arms folded. She didn't answer right away. She studied him quietly, the way one studies a stranger. 18 years, she finally said, her tone calm, steady. 18 years, Daniel. And you threw it away for a thrill. I know. Daniel's voice cracked. He leaned forward desperately. But I see it now. I was blind. You've always been steady, always been there for me. I took you for granted. Please, Grace. I can change. Her eyes softened for a brief second, remembering the man she once loved. But then the truth rose in her chest like fire, and she knew this was her moment. Daniel, she said slowly, there's something you never knew about me. He frowned, confused. All those years you thought we were scraping by, it wasn't true, Grace continued. I own businesses, properties, investments. I am worth millions, Daniel. And it's all in my name. The words hit him like a thunderclap. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He shook his head in disbelief. No, that can't be. If you had all that, why live like this? Why let me think? Because I needed to protect myself. And Emily. Grace's voice grew firmer. You were reckless, Daniel. You gambled. You wasted money. You chased dreams that burned down before they ever began. I knew if you had access to what I built, you would destroy it. So I kept it hidden. I let you believe the lie, because it was safer that way. Daniel's face twisted with humiliation. The proud man who once mocked her as boring and plain now looked like he was crumbling from the inside. He stood suddenly, pacing the room, his voice growing louder. You can't do this to me. After all our years together, after everything I gave you, don't I deserve a share? Don't I deserve something? Grace's eyes flashed with a strength he had never seen before. She stepped closer, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. You didn't leave me because of my age, she said firmly. You left me because you thought I was weak, but I was always stronger than you, Daniel. Always. Her words shattered what little pride he had left. He stared at her, his chest rising and falling heavily, his face pale with shock. For the first time, Daniel realized the truth. He hadn't left behind a dull, boring wife. He had abandoned the greatest security he could have ever known. The silence between them was thick, broken only by the sound of the rain against the windows. Daniel lowered his head, unable to meet her gaze, his body heavy with regret. Grace didn't need to say more. She had already won. Grace filed for divorce the very next week. She walked into the lawyer's office with her head held high, calm and steady. Every detail was handled carefully. The papers made it clear. Emily's future would be fully protected. College funds, property, financial security, all locked safely under Grace's control. Daniel was served the documents a few days later. His pride was already in ruins, but the sharp lines of the papers cut even deeper. The terms were not his to argue. Grace had built everything in her own name. For the first time, Daniel understood how powerless he really was. Grace did not gloat. She did not waste time on revenge speeches or bitter arguments. She simply took control of her life, the same way she had always done, quietly and efficiently. Her business grew even stronger in the months that followed. New contracts came in, her team expanded, and her reputation as a leader deepened. People admired her discipline and her vision. She no longer walked into rooms as Daniel's wife. She walked in as Grace, the woman who had built an empire with her own hands. At home, life was calmer. Emily noticed the difference. The tension that had once filled the house was gone, replaced by quiet evenings, warm dinners, and laughter that no longer felt forced. One night, while they were cleaning up after dinner, Emily hugged her mother tightly. "Mom," she whispered, "you're the strongest woman I know." Grace's eyes softened. She kissed the top of her daughter's head and smiled. "I'm strong because of you, Emily. You're the reason I never gave up." Those words sank deep into her heart. For the first time since Daniel left, Grace no longer felt humiliated. She no longer carried the weight of shame or betrayal. What she felt now was freedom. Pure, unshakable freedom. Daniel's life moved in the opposite direction. The debts he had tried to hide grew heavier, and without Grace to quietly rescue him, he drowned in them. Sophia had vanished, chasing someone else's wallet, and his old friends no longer answered his calls. He drank more often, his once charming smile fading into bitterness. At times he passed by Grace's office building and watched from a distance. He saw her walking out in tailored suits, surrounded by employees who respected her, her daughter by her side, her head held high. She was thriving. He was crumbling. And though he longed to approach her again, to ask for another chance, he knew deep down it was useless. Grace had moved on, stronger than ever, and she no longer looked back. Grace walked into her office on a bright morning, the sunlight spilling through the tall glass windows. The golden rays lit up the room, bouncing off polished desks and warm faces. Her employees greeted her as she entered. Smiles, cheerful good mornings, small nods of respect. Every person she passed looked at her with admiration. Not as someone's wife, not as someone left behind, but as their leader. She returned their greetings with a calm smile, her heels clicking softly against the floor as she made her way to her desk. Her office was wide and open, filled with plants, books, and the quiet hum of success. On her desk sat a framed photo of herself and Emily. Grace paused, picking it up carefully. The picture was simple, just the two of them at the park, Emily's arms wrapped around her, both of them laughing. It wasn't staged or perfect. It was real. Grace's lips curved into a soft smile as she studied it, her heart swelling with love and pride. She set the frame back down and looked out the window at the city below. Life had once felt heavy, uncertain, defined by the choices of someone who never truly valued her. But now it was hers. Her thoughts whispered through her mind like a voice carried by the wind. I thought losing him would break me, but losing him showed me who I really am. For a moment, she closed her eyes and let herself breathe it in. The freedom, the strength, the peace she had fought so hard to earn. She no longer carried the weight of betrayal. She no longer feared the silence of nights alone. She was not broken. She was whole. Emily's laughter from the hallway reached her ears, pulling her from her thoughts. Her daughter had stopped by after school, as she often did, bringing life and warmth into the office. Grace turned and watched her for a moment, so full of promise, so unafraid of the future. Grace took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and stepped forward. Her life was no longer defined by the man who left. It was defined by her strength, her resilience, and the love she carried for her daughter. As she walked across her office, sunlight streaming over her, she felt unshaken, steady as the ground beneath her feet. Grace was free. Grace was strong. And for the first time in a long time, she knew she had everything she needed. Hey friends, thank you for staying till the very end. Sparkling Heart, don't forget to like, share your thoughts in the comments, and hit that subscribe button for more stories. See you next time.